Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. Every week, my co-host Rebecca Sugar and I will try to make sense out of the nonsense and bring a little bit of sanity to your week.
Our quote this week comes from screenwriter Bruce Fierstein, who's written a lot of the screenplays for a lot of the Bond movies. And this was a beauty. He said, "The distance between insanity and genius is measured only by success," which, when you do our rundown, made me think of our first segment, which is going to be all about Trump and his first 100 days. And maybe that's how he's going to grade himself.
Shaken, not stirred, 100 days.
Okay. You're going to do a rundown of what we're covering this week?
Yeah. So we're starting off, we're just a little past 100 days. Maybe we're 102, 101 and a half. I'm not exactly sure, but a good time to kind of take stock, see where we are. Then our Make It Make Sense segment, where we sort of dive into a thorny issue or one that needs some unpacking, is going to be the not one but two reports coming out of Harvard about its campus problems, even as the Trump administration puts the squeeze on the Cambridge school. Our tipping point segment is going to be about elections, not here, but elections up north, and what that might say about our politics and our foreign policy. And then we'll finish off, as always, with our sunbirds. And I actually have one this week.
Good. Okay, top story is the first 100 days. Did you watch all the speeches and the cabinet meetings and the interviews?
I did not watch all of them.
No.
But it's if I had to
you have better things to do.
No, if I had to come up with a label for the top 100 days, it would be, a movie I didn't like very much, but Everything Everywhere All at Once. I feel like that's a kind of motto for what's happening. So, we were talking off camera about just how much Trump has been speaking and how present he's been. And that's, I guess, one way to start off is just kind of saturation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
that a good thing or a bad thing for you?
Well, listen, I think, to be fair, we want to break it down, and say, okay, where are the issues where we think he's had some success, and where are the issues where he seems to be in a bit of trouble. Yeah. For me, it's pretty clear. I think on some of the cultural issues, let's call it the kind of anti-woke platform, I think he's made real headway. And I think Americans really did elect him to take on those challenges. So I don't belittle that, and I don't think that's minor. I think it really went to the core of his argument.
Men and women's sports and
anti-DEI,
books about trans in kindergarten,
certain extent. And to a certain extent, the college campuses. I mean, the problems of these campuses, and we'll get into them, had become so bad that they were really ripe for some pushback. I think on the trade issues, red blinking lights for me. The economy shrinking, according to a metric that just came out yesterday. The stock market is the worst since Gerald Ford. Inflation seems like it's due to rise. The dollar is falling. It's hard to sort of find any bright spots. And I think there's cause for concern politically for Trump there. I mean, for all of his kind of persona, the bedrock of his popularity dating from 2015 was as a steward of the economy. So he's really gambling with that. And if those numbers start to come down, I think you're going to see increased political weakness elsewhere, especially as it seems like far away, but the midterms aren't actually that far away. Yeah. But those are just some thoughts. What about you, Rebecca? What are your impressions?
I think, immigration clearly was
should have said immigration
front and center.
Absolutely.
And I'd say his biggest win. It's the issue
southern border is remarkable.
Yeah.
What he's done. Remarkable.
There's really almost nobody coming across anymore. Yeah. And in spite of the cases that have caused some media attention, largely Americans do want to see illegals of all kinds deported, not just the ones who are supposedly the worst of the worst. But clearly those are nobody's crying for them. And so it's been a win, I think, across the board. And he's been talking about it a lot. He put all those little faces of the potential deportees across the lawn. I mean, he's doing everything he can to kind of message that, and he should. It's smart. I thought it was also really smart in the White House after he gave the speech, or during it, actually, he it was so business focused. It was sort of his answer to his being underwater in the polls on the economy and the tariff stuff. He brought in just a slew of business owners. The CEO of NVIDIA was there, an aerospace guy who's putting engines in jets, and they have the little model engine just sitting right there. He was bringing them up one by one to the microphone. You should watch that because it's really interesting. It's so Trump, right, to bring other people up in the middle of this presidential.
Gretchen Whitmer, go ahead.
Right.
What do you have to say?
Yes. But, they went up and they talked about the investments, the billions and billions they're going to be investing in the United States and in manufacturing, which is, in a sense, one of his answers to the tariff critique. And whether or not those, things happen or when they happen and in time for the midterms is a whole other set of questions. But it is true that he is pushing this message of bringing manufacturing back and setting up that narrative for the American public and for his base in particular, which cares about that. I thought also so funny, of course, Senator Schumer called this the 100 Days of Hell, a little hyperbolic, in the same way that Trump says it's the best 100 days ever in the history of human existence. Yeah. On the other side, you've got hell.
Yeah, that cabinet meeting was quite performance art. Yeah, I mean, Chuck Schumer's listed. I think his approval rating is about 17%, so it probably is.
Hell for him.
It's probably hell for him.
And the rest of us who have to listen to him, I think.
Yeah.
And we should just mention, this is happening Thursday. We're filming Thursday morning, but people will be watching this later, that we were talking before that Mike Waltz has stepped down now. And so that they waited till after the big 100-day celebration to tell us that, but it is happening and that's part of the 100-day story. For sure.
And the sort of unrest at the Pentagon and at the National Security Council, those are stories to watch. I keep going back and forth on sort of this immigration question about the picking of these test cases, whether it's Khalil or Kilmar Garcia or this guy who was just ordered released the other day in Vermont. I see the logic of it, right? Because you kind of put a face on it, right? To just say we've decreased immigration feels abstract. On the other hand, they've picked really thorny cases, and I wonder if there's a kind of not only a backlash, but sort of how you pick the battles you fight, and how strategic is the administration being about that. But they have an eye for optics. They sure do. I mean, that picture of Trump and Zelensky in the Vatican was just an extraordinary picture, and I think actually did a lot to sort of maybe heal is a strong word, but sort of revise the sort of image of them screaming at each other in the Oval Office, right? So these things are very fluid. I think definitely, the Russia-Ukraine war was not solved on the first day. I don't think anyone expected it to. I've said on this program before, I worry about what's going on with Iran. That also, we're not going to have all the answers in 100 days, I guess.
Which is part of, I think, what President Trump was saying in his ABC interview on the 100 days, that it's 100 days, and he does promise everything will happen on day one, and it doesn't because it was never going to. But he also does mention, listen, I've only been here for 100 days. I can't clean up the entire world. And he was very specific in that message on the tariffs and very optimistic, as he would be. That's his, he has to put the happy face on it. But I think he said something like, everything's going to be fine. It was sort of calm down. I know that it looks bad now, but calm down and hold on. And so, listen, he's very good at storytelling, I think, to the average American. And I think back to your point about why he picks specific cases of illegal immigrants to fight about. I think there's a legal question about that, which you're better suited to answer than I am. But from a narrative point of view, right, it's just, we have an argument now across the country, and he had it in this interview as well. The legal stuff is almost too much in the weeds for most people who just look at this and say, there was no process when President Biden just shuttled these people in. Now you're going to, point the finger at Trump and say you have to have a process on the way out. Yes, you do. Legally, you do. But the bigger narrative point that he's making is, the legal stuff aside, we let these people in without any process. Don't bother me when I'm trying to get them out. And most people, even if they understand the legal implications of that, emotionally they attach to that. It's a very rational argument emotionally.
Sure. And I feel that. I mean, just to speak totally personally, I mean, as someone who, and as the Sun is very committed to due process, it's sort of one of our North Stars, the person who was just ordered released, you say, okay, that was kind of maybe a little bit, extra legal. He was arrested on his way to an immigration hearing. That sounds kind of Banana Republic. Okay. Then you read what he said, and he said, I want to kill Jews. And he said, and to your point of sort of the kind of, let's say the legal sense versus the common sense, you say, why is this person in the country? Right. I mean, at a gut level.
So you might still be right legally.
At a gut level, right.
But everybody else is looking at it and saying, good grief, enough with the legal mumbo jumbo. Why are these people in my country?
Right. And, to some extent, I think, and knock on wood or sort of famous last words, maybe some of the sense of impending crisis over kind of disobeying a court order or sort of a constitutional confrontation, which we've spoken about here, Rebecca, seems to maybe be dissipating a little bit, at least. I think as these processes play out, these kind of cases are really complicated and are sort of, and a lot of it happens behind closed doors. So I hope sort of as just a constitutional matter that sort of kind of dies down a little bit, this confrontation.
Just one other sort of narrative contrast between this administration and the resistance, the Democrats, is, and if you watched that speech and all those businessmen in the room and the engine sitting up there, I always get this sense that Trump just is a builder. He sees himself as a builder, and he wants to define himself in his position as president of this country as the builder of things, actual infrastructure or just the spirit of the nation. He's always trying to express this sense that he's the builder in chief. And it does come across as a really great contrast to the Democrats who, hold sit-ins and complain, and Hakeem Jeffries and just Schumer, and who just want to tear everything down. And they haven't yet, the Democrats, found a way to give voice to what they want to build, only that they want to take down this hell that President Trump has built.
Yeah, and, I think the polling reflects that. I mean, Trump's approval rating has dropped precipitously, I think largely because of the tariffs and the economy. And, by some measures has him down to almost 40 or 39%. But what you haven't seen is a rise in the Democratic approval rating, right? Which makes sense. I mean, he's the incumbent. It's going to be a referendum on him. But, it's kind of like, in a basketball game. I mean, you're not going to win if you don't score. It's not enough just to play defense. So, I mean, this has to sort of this story will evolve. Not to just be harping on this, but I really think the economic fallout here is TBD. I mean, if there is a recession, if there is higher inflation, eventually that's going to redound to Trump's detriment, and the argument that this is Biden's economy just isn't going to fly.
Yeah, no, that was not his best line.
Especially when Trump has been so aggressive and energetic about making his own stamp on the economy, right? So that's a gamble. The dealer has yet to send the cards. The cards out. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to your alma mater. You proud Harvard alum. Why don't you start and talk about your feelings?
I won't sing the fight song.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, right? So we know about the moves Trump has made against Harvard. And there were some rumors. Our Novi Zukovsky here at the paper reported that there might be some movement on Harvard's part towards settling or exploring settling. I think a lot of us would like some kind of deal or some kind of settlement.
That's how badly they don't want to lose their tax exemption. That tells you how important it is to them.
For sure. And they've already lost billions kind of along the way. So then you have, in the midst of this, and I think this really, talk about the art of the deal, this really helps Trump, because in the midst of this whole situation, remember, Harvard has now filed a lawsuit to block Trump. So it's a legal matter. It's not just a political fight. The report comes out from Harvard, hundreds of pages, basically describing endemic anti-Semitism at the institution. And you couldn't have a better argument for Trump's position that a hammer is needed here. And what really bothers me is the argument from some on the left. Michelle Goldberg made this argument in the Times the other day that, well, the anti-Semitism is totally a pretext for Trump. They really just want to take over the university. Now, for sure that the conservative movement has long had an antagonistic relationship with the university. It doesn't have everything to do with the Jews. I mean, it has to do with ideology but to downplay, to say it's just a little bit a crude anti-Semite here or there, like, oh, there's a bad sign or whatever, is totally undermined by this report, which suggests that the anti-Semitism at Harvard is not just a matter of unruly students in Harvard Yard, but it's in the classrooms, it's in the seminar rooms, and it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that there's a continuum between the administration, the professors, and the students. And there it is. There it is, kind of, and it's chilling to read. It's really appalling.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the protests and all of the theatrics on campus, which have often turned violent or more than just theatrics, but even so, they sort of almost feel like the shiny object on the side that has caught our attention. But the real miss is that these institutions are just soaked in this ideology. And I would say that anti-Semitism is just one branch of it. And it's the part that we're paying attention to now. But I would imagine white Christian straight men have stories to tell too, and others who've been ignored over the years as the same ideology has attacked them. Yes, and so it's everywhere. We've talked about this. We've had a slight debate about this. It's why I think it's not fixable, because there is no will to fix it, because it's not just a problem in this one part of the school. It's all over the place. I wrote down, there were some changes based on these reports that Harvard said they'd be quick to make, which I just saw was just a couple of lines. It just tells me why it can't be fixed. Mm-hmm. They said Harvard is now they've made doxing against its code of conduct, and they listed it as bullying. It wasn't. Doxing was okay before. This is Harvard. Do we need an actual action point to stop doxing? Students and faculty will undergo anti-Semitism training. I'm tripping up on the words because I'm so annoyed by this. Yeah. But anti-Semitism training is not high on my list of ways to help people to not hate the Jews. It never works out well.
I'd hate the Jews more after I did anti-Semitism.
Exactly. There's a good Modi skit about that, the comedian. No, don't do that. You're going to create more anti-Semites, and it's always going to contain something about Islamophobia and every other ism too.
Rebecca, we saw that. We had the release of the anti-Semitism report, and its twin, a conjoined twin, was an Islamophobia report.
Some of it was actually embedded in the anti-Semitism report. If you look carefully, they actually took some space from the anti-Semitism report.
What is that? I mean, the ultimate example of both sides.
It's what it always is, right? Which is not helpful to the Jews. And they also said there's currently a review of bias curriculum. I never want to send my children anywhere where there is a bias curriculum. Adults, faculty have to be trained. Students have to be trained. Students who got into Harvard should be mature and sophisticated and smart enough not to need training and curricula on bias. I find that so shocking, and it just tells me that not only is Harvard, it's not about it being a bad place for the Jews. It's a bad place for serious, thoughtful people who want to learn things.
And that's reflected at, I think for the second year in a row, FIRE ranked it the worst university in the country for freedom of expression. Right? And that has nothing to do with the Jews. Right.
And I wish they had done another report, right? We were saying off camera about just students who aren't Israeli or Jewish, students who are not Palestinian or Muslim or in that camp, just everybody else, which is probably most people on campus. What has this been like for them? Mm-hmm. And what do they experience in the classroom? What are they holding back? What are they afraid of? It must be not fun to be the average student at Harvard today, too. And so Harvard just doesn't have any adults in the room, and I don't know what elite institution means anymore. Mm-hmm. But to me, I don't put Harvard in that basket.
Yeah, just two things. One is it's really heartbreaking for me. I mean, for me, Harvard seminar rooms, lecture halls were really a place of self-discovery, of learning, of sort of finding my own voice, of listening to others. Not to sound too sappy about it, but that's what college is for, right? I mean, that's sort of why you're there. That's why my parents paid a lot of money for me to be there. And to see, in reading the report, to see what the kinds of rhetoric and exclusion and discrimination, honestly, that was practiced in these very rooms where I sat. It was really heartbreaking.
Yeah. That's an important point, though, we should parse out, right? There were a lot of things in this report. I didn't read every line of the 300-something pages, but I read big chunks of it. There were complaints filed by Jewish students that you would put into different categories, right?
Sure.
Some things are just people said mean things or unkind things, and that kind of goes into the man up column if they were isolated incidents. But joined together with this whole other basket of actual
who said them. I mean, if a professor or a teacher says it, then that's a different
100%
matter, right?
But there are other categories, right? Actual harassment, actual, your professor's not giving you the grade you deserve. There are real implications that are more than just hurt feelings that we're talking about here that I think are the real problem. And they're hard sometimes to prove, and they're hard to point to so they can get by more easily. A friend of mine, not at Harvard, but has a daughter at Barnard College, and all of the identifiably Jewish girls were not admitted to the sorority last year. Like, there's just 1,000,001 ways that this shows up. And so it's not just whiny people saying, oh, they're saying, from the river to the sea. It's not just Jews who don't like what they hear. We're talking about much more than that here. And then all the way to the end of the spectrum where, violence or megaphones screaming in your ear being spit upon. But so that's what you mean when you say endemic, and that's what I think we all mean when we say there are no adults at Harvard who took care of this and who want to take care of it. And Alan Garber says he's sorry.
Yeah.
Not good enough.
I mean, and he's been there for as long as I've been alive. I mean, in one capacity. So if things deteriorated, he was at the crime scene. Yeah. Let me just say one more thing here, and that is I particularly, in reading the report, was particularly outraged on behalf of the Israeli students at Harvard, right? It's one thing for someone, with a Jewish name or to feel pride, but, Israeli students have Israeli names and they have accents a lot of the time. They're immediately recognizable. Yeah. And I know from my time at both Harvard and Stanford, the Israeli students I came and there are a tiny number of them relative, to the whole population, were just some of the most extraordinary, creative, interesting people who came in a little bit older, having done the army, and just added so much to university. And I can't imagine what it's like now to be an Israeli student. Forget about Jewish Americans, an Israeli student. Yeah. And because the argument is, well, even if something's anti-Israel or at least it's not anti-Semitic. But imagine being Israeli, and the best you can hope for is language that demonizes Israel.
No, and people joke, these are 18, 19-year-olds in some cases who've faced down Hamas terrorists at the end of a gun, so they can handle. But it's different, and you're here for a different experience, and you expect better, and it's shocking never to get a reprieve from it. But I just want to say, at the end of the day, this is going to sound harsh, but, all of this, everything we just said, is to say there's some responsibility on Jews and white Christian straight males and female athletes and everybody else to lose the prestige addiction, to join Lil Leibovitz of Tablet Magazine and get out. And we're banging our heads against the wall to preserve some idea of an elite institution that might be 30 years ago already and no longer exists today. And the same adjunct professor you're going to get at whatever college might teach you the same things you'd get from the adjunct professor at Harvard. It's not clear to me that you're getting the best education. I mean, they had a Harvard professor who plagiarized her way to the top. It's not clear to me that they have the best and the brightest faculty or students at this point. And I'd pick Hillsdale over Harvard any day if I just looked at it from a pure education point of view. And so we all have to lose our prestige addiction, stop going to these places, getting treated terribly, and then acting like we can't believe it's happening to us. Now we know. If you didn't know before today, you should have, but now you definitely know. Harvard's written it in its own report. Now stop applying there. Go somewhere else. You're not there.
Yeah, no, I am. I mean, it's I think what's hard is that, schools and cultures change pretty quickly. So, I was talking to a bunch of other Harvard alums about this report, WhatsApp group, and what kind of surfaced was that it seems like something happened in the culture around 2014, 2015, and that we're now at the kind of culmination of that 10 years later, and it was turbocharged by all sorts of things October
Isn't that
7th.
social media? Isn't that like
But
right when
it has to do with
and
Instagram,
TikTok?
social media, the political climate, all that. So, and that's sort of right when I left. So it's just, it's hard to know, it's hard to kind of get your bearings. But like you said, this is sort of Harvard's own report. And, in any court case or any legal proceeding, a confession is the most powerful testimony there is. And now we have a confession. Okay. Our tipping point is, as we said, our neighbor to the north, Canada. Sort of a strange election, hard to make heads or tails of it. I mean, the Conservative Party was up ahead for a while. There's one narrative of the election that Trump started talking about being the 51st state, about him being a governor and all that, and the Canadian people revolted en masse and swung the election to the Liberals, to Mark Carney. I don't know if that's how compelling that is. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not right. Certainly now Canada is taking a more adversarial stance. On the other hand, we've seen deeply troubling trends in Canada, I think, and anti-Semitism is just one of them. So what do you make of the Canadian election? What do you make of Canada? Have you ever been?
I've been many times. I've been to the Calgary Stampede, which was amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
I've been to Toronto and Montreal and all those places, and it's cold. But Banff is pretty.
Yeah.
Canada just made a huge mistake. I do think that Trump's 51st state stuff and tariff stuff, to me, clearly swung the election because Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party was ahead.
Yeah.
And then just like in a minute, it swung, but dramatically, like 30 points.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
He came from behind. And Mark Carney has absolutely no record of success to recommend himself for this position. And he's the inheritor of Justin Trudeau's debacle, which saw everything go wrong in Canada. There is no metric that's good, right? Unemployment rates and cost of living is soaring. And I think I read that 1 in 10 people as of last year in Canada were on welfare, even as they import the largest number of immigrants per capita in the world or among them.
And, they have extraordinary natural resources and a small population. So they
don't even use their own resources. Right. They ship them to other people. Everything about Canada is just a mess. And of course, they have they've made the Biden administration look like the torchbearers of free speech. I mean, they have eviscerated free speech in Canada. They have compelled speech laws. They've done everything possible in the woke universe to make it the most inhospitable place to live. And Canadians, just to spite Donald Trump, did the worst thing for themselves and voted in more of the same. And it's going to tank them. And I'm sorry for the good people of Canada, but this was a silly self-defeating thing to do. And I think what's really bad news for the rest of us is there are very few places left on planet Earth that could call themselves part of the West. And we've talked about this before. Western European countries are falling one by one. Australia looks like it's going to fall in a few days. Albanese is making deals with the Greens. The sort of leftward swing, and not just left and right, but left, all the way left, identity politics, DEI, crazy economic policies, semi-socialist stuff is happening in these places. Canada had a moment here where we thought, oh, they're gonna push the stop button. They're gonna save themselves. And because of their hatred for Donald Trump's silliness, they jumped the Western ship and over the cliff, and we needed them. And so we'll have to go it alone and maybe pick up some new allies. But I just fear that the West, or what we thought we knew as the West, is shrunk to something that might just look like an island called America now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I think a change in government in Canada would have been really welcome. And I agree about Trudeau's disastrous legacy. Nobody's shedding a tear for Justin. But I think it's a reminder that, there's a phrase that's going around now vis-a-vis Trump, and that's that other countries have politics too, right? And there is an effect to what we do here and the kinds of rhetoric we see coming out of the White House. And it's something to watch. I mean, one of Trump's sort of modus operandi is to be really tough on allies, it seems to me. And so whether it's, Denmark and the whole Greenland thing or Canada here, I don't know. I've been skeptical from the beginning about picking these fights. They don't seem to me any positive outcome for them. I think where the rubber meets the road here will be in Europe. And will we see a sort of how will this kind of tough love, let's call it, like how will that play on the continent and elsewhere? But it was I do think it was a Canadian mistake, and it was also a little bit of like a goof from us. I mean, to push them.
Absolutely, but they didn't have to take the bait. If the complaint is that tariffs are damaging to their economy, they just damage their economy 10 times worse by installing a man who's going to continue to ruin it.
For sure, but you have the worldwide superpower arguing that it's going to conquer you. I mean, that's going to engender an annoyed reaction.
Of course,
and you're going to turn to whoever is most vocal against that, right? And the thing about having political allies abroad is you don't undercut them. So if Polya was it just totally eviscerated his platform.
There's no excuse for Trump doing it, but there's equally no excuse that Canadians have agency. If they have politics, they also have agency, and they could have rolled their eyes at Trump like other people do and done what's good for themselves and not just to poke him in the eye, because he's still fine and they're not. And I think they're going to regret this terribly.
Yeah. I think the best case scenario is that, Carney certainly doesn't have the profile of a radical. I mean, he was a banker and a finance guy. Hopefully he can pivot from Trudeau's excesses. But it's remarkable. It's remarkable that after such a tenure, Canadians voted for the incumbent party.
He did say he's going to meet with Trump, and they're making nice now, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see. Okay, that felt like a sunburn. Sunburn.
That was good.
Sunburn time?
Although snowburn, maybe.
Yeah.
Frostburn.
Okay, since you have an angry one, you'll go last. We'd like to end on a fit of rage. Mine is, I don't know if you saw, you did the cabinet meeting yesterday or 2 days ago, and they go around the room with all of his cabinet members. And when Rubio spoke, he just said something that was sort of shocking. He said he had found a stack of documents from the Biden State Department left over that labeled American citizens as, quote, vectors of disinformation. I mean, it couldn't sound more Orwellian if they were trying. And these were American citizens who were being targeted for censorship in the future. And they had documents on these people. And just, freedom of speech is very important to me and, of course, to America. It's embedded in our First Amendment. And I'm just made fun of Canada and free speech. We were not far behind. In fact, we might have been vying for top dog in the censorship biz under the Biden administration. And this is just another example of how horrible it was and how seriously close we all came to losing our First Amendment rights and just letting them go. And so no American citizen at least should be a vector of disinformation. And that phrase should sort of vanish from the lexicon in America, I hope, forever.
Yeah. Just the word vector is just such a terrible word.
Vector of disinformation. Somebody standing there with like a laser beam and
or you could see someone kind of like reclaiming it, having like a T-shirt, that says vector
V for vector.
Vector of disinformation. That
has to be the title of this episode,
right?
The vector of disinformation episode.
Ironically, so my sunburn, Rebecca, is sort of the firing of Mike Waltz, which just came through. Word of it came through this morning, and we'll see by the time you listen to this. Who knows what could be happening? We're always battling the time lag in terms of how we come to you guys. But I don't know if it's a burn, but I'm disappointed. I thought Waltz was everything in his background suggested he was someone who understood America's role in the world, understood where our alliances lie. He was one of the names people threw out when people got worried about some of the maybe more isolationist instincts or just the nature of Trump's inner circle. And Waltz, I think, was someone, along with Rubio, actually, who people say, these are one of the people you can rely on. So obviously, Trump lost confidence in him. It's clear that this had to do with the Signalgate issue.
Well, interesting. Just do you think it was because of Signalgate, or do you think it's because of what you just said, because he was part of that non-isolationist?
Yeah, maybe those two things came together here. He was vulnerable, and people moved on him. if I actually admired Trump for not firing people from Signalgate. I thought, obviously it was a huge screw up, but he's like, okay, whatever. And Hegseth has clearly, was a more prolific user of Signal than Mike Waltz. And so, yeah, I'm sad to see him go, I guess. And I worry about his replacement. As we know from the Biden administration, when Jake Sullivan was National Security Advisor, it's a hugely important role. And it's a role that sometimes is more powerful than the Secretary of State. At least it was under Biden.
And Trump won. He got rid of Flynn in the first, 25 days, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so I hope that this doesn't portend a sort of more inward turn, although that's to be seen. Early word so far, and this, again, could be fake news by the time you hear it, is that Steve Witkoff is going to slip into that role. Wish for the best, but certainly his tenure, I think, has been rocky. He has had success, in terms of hostage negotiations, for sure. But his profile already includes Iran and Russia, and so these are deep waters. So sayonara, Mike Waltz. You gave up a safe congressional seat for 100 days. Yeah. I hope that was worth it.
Maybe we'll have him on and ask him.
Yeah, I hear he'll be available. Anyway, Rebecca.
All right, good to see you.
Another good episode. Thanks.